Hey everyone, Smarty Pants Chess here with another game from the CCC11 finals. Again, this is between Stockfish and Leela Chess 0, and Stockfish is white in this game, Leela's playing black, and the opening moves are d4 knight to f6, bishop g5, so we get a Trompowsky, and the book moves continue with knight to e4, bishop f4 and c5, white plays f3, there's queen a5, c3, knight to f6, d5, queen b6, and then bishop to c1. And this is the end of the books, and from here on in it's both the engine's turns to make the moves. So the bishop protects the pawn on b2, and Leela now plays her first move, which is e6, striking out in the centre, and Stockfish plays e4 to reinforce it and has this nice pawn chain which I've highlighted with a nice green arrow. Now typically here the main moves are actually e takes d5, e takes d5, and black can play bishop to d6, white can play knight to a3, black can castle and then bishop to d3, rook e8 check and knight to e2. And these are the main moves in my opening book, and play even continues on with bishop to f8, knight c4, queen to d8, knight to e3, d6, and castles knight b to d7, which gives white a slight edge in the opening. And the Trompowsky is known as a very attacking opening, so it's very interesting to see how Stockfish will do in this game. But instead of taking on d5, Leela here actually played the move d6. So trying to get the bishop out on c8, which reinforces the e6 pawn, keeps the tension in the centre. And Stockfish maintains the solidarity in the centre with c4, reinforcing d5. Play continued g6. Stockfish played knight e2, Leela played bishop g7, and Stockfish played knight e to c3. So these are all very interesting and standard moves at the moment. So black's just developing and white's just reinforcing the centre. So they've got their knight on g1 over to c3, and will probably place their other knight on a3 at some point, I would imagine. Leela castled here, Stockfish played bishop to e2. So the only problem with white's structure is that this bishop is a bit of a problem for white because all the pawns are on white squares, so it's going to be very hard to develop this bishop to somewhere good at this current moment anyway, unless some pawns get taken. Leela continued with knight to e8. Now I was thinking the most common move here is actually just castling, I would imagine, and black can strike out with the move f5. And it gets quite even if d takes e6, there's bishop d4 with check, king h1, takes, and knight to d5. So this is quite even for both sides. Black's got a really nice bishop pair, but white's knight is now in the centre, and they've castled quite easily. But in the game, Stockfish played a rather aggressive move. They played the move h4, and we see this a lot in computer moves, especially from Alpha 0 and Leela Chess 0. So preparing the move h5, and here Leela played h6, and this is the typical idea to defend these h-pawn pushes, because if white plays h5, black can play g5, and suddenly white's lost all the momentum in their attack. So instead of playing h5, Stockfish played g4, just building up a bigger attack with this pawn storm. And instead of sitting back, Leela played the very aggressive f5. So after f5 there's a lot of tension in the centre, especially between all these pawns that can take one another. And it's going to get really complicated, or at least it would be for a human player. For instance, white can go wrong here with the move d takes e6, because black can recapture with the bishop. And if e takes f5, g takes f5, takes again and bishop takes, knight d5, queen d8. This is actually given as favouring black now. So because black's got these two raking bishops, they can play moves like knight c6 with ease, and white's structure is a bit of a mess because of these two isolated pawns. But Stockfish doesn't go wrong. Instead they actually increase the tension with h5, and now there's so many pawns attacking one another, it's getting really complicated. And again, black can probably go wrong here with moves like g takes h5, because then white can play takes on e6, bishop takes e6, and then g takes f5, and we'll pick up the h-pawns at a later date. And white's got a very nice structure here. This is a superb game if you ever get into it. If you ever get a structure like this, you're probably got a winning attack here for white, I would imagine. It was very easy to play. But back to the game, Leela actually played g5, so avoids taking on h5. And again, I think white can probably go wrong here, because I was thinking of d takes e6, bishop takes e6, and then take on f5. I think this is perfectly playable for white actually. After bishop f7, there's knight d5, takes, queen takes, and rook f7, knight c3, and bishop takes c3, b takes c3, and black may be able to play knight to f6 with the queen retreating. And this is actually giving it slightly better for white. So white's got an amazing structure on the king side with a passed f pawn. The other problem is they've got doubled c pawns. But actually I think white is actually a pawn up in this position. It has the two bishops. So it's perfectly playable for white to play d takes e6 in this position. However, Stockfish wanted more and they played the move f4. Now this looks really incredible to me because it looks really risky for white to do such a thing, especially with all the pawns attacking one another. But let's just go through this quickly. So if black plays f takes g4, then I think white can just play f takes g5, and if h takes g5 there's bishop takes g4, and this is very nice for white. So we can't do that if we're black. So we can't take on g4. I was also thinking f takes e4, but then white can play f takes g5, and again has a superb game because then we're just winning a pawn with bishop takes g5 at a move later date. So the only other move for black to really play here is g takes f4, which is what happened in the game. And instead of recapturing on f4, Stockfish decided to take on e6. So d takes e6 is played, and then bishop takes e6, followed by g takes f5, attacking the bishop, and the bishop retreats to f7. Now at the moment it's equal material, but white is actually in fact attacking this f4 pawn, but at the moment the queen is also attacking b2, so it would just be a trade of pawns if white decided to capture. So instead Stockfish plays knight to a4, attacks the queen and defends the pawn. Queen a5 check is played, bishop d2, so the queen is defending the knight and the bishop is attacking the queen, and the queen retreats to a6. And now Stockfish takes the pawn on f4. However, black is attacking this pawn now, c4, with the bishop and the queen twice. They could actually capture this pawn back if they wished. So if bishop takes c4, white could probably take on c4 and then queen takes c4. But white probably gains an advantage after knight to d2, attacking the queen, defending the e4 pawn. After queen d3, white can play moves like rook g1. Threatening to play bishop takes h6 because the bishop is now pinned by the rook. So with king h8, there's nice moves that white can play like rook to g3, attacking the queen. If the queen retreats, knight c3 is perfectly playable for white. And if knight c6 is queen g4, knight to e5, and maybe just queen h3 with white going to castle queenside next move. And this is quite a nice game for white. So for this reason maybe black didn't want to take on c4 at this precise moment. Instead Leela played knight to c6 instead, developing another piece. And Stockfish played knight to c3. And now actually black does capture on c4. But instead of taking on c4 straight away, Stockfish plays rook to g1, threatens to play bishop h6. So Leela moves her king off the g file and takes on c4 with the queen recapturing, and then plays queen g4. So even though both sides are just swap pawns, white's got a very dangerous attack coming up. In fact, they're threatening to play queen g6 followed by bishop takes h6. And white could also potentially castle queenside here if they wished. Rook f7 was played by Leela. And now there's a potential attack for white. I was thinking queen g6 here with check. After king g8, what happens if bishop takes h6, because the bishop is pinned, of course? Well, black could potentially play knight to e5. Queen g3 is probably forced, king h7, and moves like bishop to f4. And these are the computer moves. And then play continues knight d3, king d2, and knight takes f4. And white has to be a bit careful here, because if queen takes f4 for instance, there's bishop h6 winning the queen, and white's losing this game. So after knight takes f4, white should probably play h6. The point is, if bishop takes h6, then queen g8 is checkmate. So after h6, black's best move is actually knight to f6. And then the queen can recapture on f4, because this time if bishop takes h6, white can play queen takes h6. And after king takes h6, rook g6, king h7, rook h1 into check, knight to h5, and that's checkmate for white. And that's because in this position, white has sacrificed the pawn to open the h-file. So after h6, black should play knight to f6, queen takes f4, and now instead of taking the pawn, they should play bishop h8, and king c2 is the best move for white. And actually, black can equalise with a move like knight to d5, because the knight on c3 is pinned and the e4 pawn is pinned by the queen on c4. So after queen takes d6, knight b4 check, king b1, this is actually given as a very equal game with a slight edge for white. And if we go back to this position, I don't think white really wants a slight edge from this position. They should be absolutely dominating the game from here on in. So instead of playing queen g6, which could lead to a drawish position, white instead played castle queenside and just develops their pieces and the rook in the centre. Black played b5 here, attacking the a4 knight. White responded with b3, attacking the queen retreats to b4, and Stockfish plays knight to d5, attacking the queen again, and queen takes e4 is played. But now Stockfish goes in for the kill. They can play f6, threatening to take on g7. If black responded here with b takes a4, then white can finish black off with queen g6 check. After a trade of queens, then white can recapture on g6 with the h-pawn with check, king g8, and then g takes f7, king takes f7, f takes g7. White has just slaughtered black and he's absolutely winning this position. So in this position, black can't take on a4 just yet. Instead, Leela played knight to e5, attacking the queen, and Stockfish responded with queen to g3. Queen f3 was played in this position, but now I think actually black is absolutely losing. For instance, I would have played bishop takes e5 in this position, because if queen takes g3, then bishop takes g3, knight takes f6, white just clearly wins a piece. However, in the game, again, white just wins a piece in this position. So if we just go back, it looks as though black's position is pretty terrible. I forgot to mention actually that if knight takes f6 in this position, then white can respond with queen takes g7 with check, rook takes g7, and then white can actually play knight takes f6 with check, forking the king and queen. So after king h8, there's knight takes e4. And even if black took on g1, let's say, there's rook takes g1, b takes a4, bishop takes e5, pawn takes, and then just maybe pawn takes a4. White is in an absolutely dominant position, has a piece up, and should have an easy victory here. So this explains why Leela played queen f3 in this position, but then Stockfish just responds with f takes g7, wins the bishop. Leela takes on g3, the rook recaptured, and then Leela plays knight takes g7, and Stockfish just plays knight to c3, attacking the b5 pawn, and white now emerges a piece up, with an extra bishop. Knight takes h5 was played in the game. Stockfish took the knight on e5. Of course, if knight takes g3, I'm sure white will just take with the knight with the bishop, and would have 3 pieces for a rook. So in the game, d takes e5 was played by Leela. Play continued on, rook h3, attacking the knight. The knight went to f4. Stockfish took on f4, the pawn recaptured, and white played rook to d6, and this is actually pretty much game over. Play continued on with king g7, white took on h6, rook afa was played, and knight takes b5. So play continued on with black trying to push this pawn up the board, but of course Stockfish is just a whole piece up. And after knight to e6 check, king g3, rook g7, king f2, white just takes on f8, and after a few more moves, it's pretty much game over. There's no way for black to queen this pawn. Knight c4 check, rook e5 takes, king f3, rook f5, and play continued with white just picking up the f-pawn. And Stockfish delivered checkmate with rook to d6, which is a very nice victory for Stockfish over Leela. So it's very hard to dissect where black went wrong in this position. They looked like they were under the cosh from the start, and after this h4 move by white, black was under immense pressure throughout the whole game. But anyway, I know the Trompowsky is a very aggressive opening and good opening for white to play, so it's probably definitely worth learning and adding into your own repertoires. But anyway, this has been Smarty Pants Chess. Thanks for watching my analysis of this game. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please drop a like, maybe even comment, or subscribe to the channel if you want to watch more chess videos in the future. Hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye for now.